Welcome to another edition of Southern Home Talk. I'm Chuck Phillip with South Alabama Home Inspections. This is an episode on poisonous snakes of Alabama. I do quite a few inspections for new people who have moved to the area, and I figured I would go ahead and put this presentation up so you can tell the difference between the non-poisonous ones and the ones that are. Most of the snakes that are down here are non-poisonous. We really want to keep these snakes around because they are beneficial to our environment. We really don't even want to kill the poisonous ones either, but we do need to know how to identify those, and just in case if you run across one. What you're looking at in this photograph is the old water moccasin, also known as the cottonmouth or gaper. It's got several names it goes by. Most people here call them a cottonmouth. And these guys here like to be around water, creeks. It can also be in your pool too, so that's one thing you have to watch out for, especially in the skimmers. Basically, they view your pool as another pond, but pretty much these guys like to hang around water, and they always don't have to be there. That's another misconception about the water moccasin, is that they always have to be real close to water, and that's not necessarily so. They've been found as far as a mile inland, so they can fare pretty well away from water. One of the ways you can identify a water moccasin from a water snake, and unfortunately a lot of water snakes are killed needlessly because they're mistaken for water moccasins or cottonmouths, and the water snake can actually do a pretty good job of imitating it too. It can flare its head out because it's a safety mechanism for it. It wants you to think he's a water moccasin. But one of the primary ways you can tell is from this band that runs right across here. And also it's got kind of a hood above the top of its eyes on both sides. It's definitely got the triangular shaped head, and they're also mostly fat and stubby. They don't really get very long. Probably the longest one you're going to find is around 3, maybe 3.5 feet. That's going to be a full-grown adult, and it's going to be mostly black or solid brown. Usually when they have this banding here like you see, that's when they're still young, and they may even have a yellow or green tail. So that's one of the ways you can actually tell if you're looking at a cottonmouth. What you're looking at in this photograph is a water snake, and it kind of sort of does look like a water moccasin. It's got some of the banding, so you would think that maybe this is just a juvenile water moccasin. But one thing you can tell, look at the narrow head, and also the pupils are round, and it doesn't have the hood or the mask. And so this is one of the ways you can tell the difference between a water moccasin and a water snake. And there are several species of these water snakes here in Alabama. So, know the difference and don't kill these guys. I mean, they want to be here just like me and you do. And so does the water moccasin. I mean, he has its place in its environment. And basically what we need to do is just watch out for them and don't step on them. I will say this, that if you have a water moccasin at the house, you might want to probably dispatch that one or have someone that can come and relocate it, because they are territorial, and it's been known that they pretty much only live about 50 yards from where they were born, so it's not likely he would move from that location and go somewhere else. So, for safety reasons, it might be a good idea, if you do have a water moccasin living on your property, to dispatch it in some way. Well, this is another typical water moccasin here. It's a juvenile. It's still got some of the banding on it. And you can see it's got the typical mask. And these guys pretty much don't do a whole lot of moving around if they don't have to. They're kind of like ambush predators, and they'll find a really good hiding spot to get in, and they'll just sit there waiting for a frog to come by or anything else that's small prey. I mean, they basically feed off frogs and fish, but they'll take small mammals like birds. And you got to be really careful walking around and don't step on them, because that's pretty much how a lot of people get bit. And not only that, but during the late summer, especially late July and all of August, they pretty much go nocturnal because it's just too hot for them to be out. And so they'll pretty much do all their hunting at nighttime. Okay, this is another example of a juvenile water moccasin that's probably just a few months old. They have live birth. They don't hatch out of eggs. And you can see from the very back here, it's got a green yellowish tail. And so what these young ones would do was get in a ball and they'll wiggle it and try to imitate a worm. Then hopefully a frog will come over and snatch his tail and he'll reach around there and grab it. You can see in this photograph where he managed to get a small water snake. And so they still have this light bandy. They don't get darker until they get older. But these guys still pack a punch. I mean, they're born with a set of fangs and venom, and they're not supervised by their mother after they're born. They just go out on their own. So, and it's also known that they pretty much stay within around a 50-yard radius of where they were born. So if you've got a pool, you really have to watch out for these guys because they pretty much view that as just another pond or a lake. And so they'll take up camp in one of your skimmers. And that's got to be really careful if you've got a pool. And when you pull your skimmer lid off, you want to take a stick and kind of swish around in there to make sure one of these guys is not sitting in there waiting on you to do that. It's not that they're doing that. That's just where they want to be. They really don't want to bite you if they don't have to. Okay, here's another example of a water moccasin. It's getting darker in color. You can see as it's gotten bigger, the banding starts to become less and less visible. One thing about water moccasins is they're very buoyant, and usually that's another way to tell the difference between a water snake and a water moccasin. Usually the entire body of a water moccasin's up out of the water like you see. The whole thing is very buoyant and floating. And they usually will swim with their head at a 45-degree angle to the water. They always keep their head up like at a pitched angle like this here. So that's just another way to tell the difference between water snakes and cottonmouths. It's been my experience with the many encounters I've had with them. About 60% of the time they'll run, and the other 40% of the time they will kind of sort of do this here. They know that they blend in well with their surroundings, and so they will flash this mouth wide open, and they may even hiss some and rattle the tail against the ground. They're trying to get your attention. They're saying, hey, look out, I'm standing right here, get away. And that's their way of warning you to back off. And this is not a vague threat. I mean, they actually do mean it. And I've tested this behavior some. I've actually put my boot right up against them, and they would just keep flashing their mouth wide open and flashing their fangs and beating their tail against the ground. They're really doing everything they can to warn me to stay back and stay away. And so the only time I could ever really get them to bite is to take my boot and kind of put a little pressure on their body. And even that was just mostly a nip. And I didn't really want to try stepping on them hard. Didn't want to hurt the snake. And maybe at that point it probably would have put a little more emphasis in its bite. But I found these things to be quite the contrary to what other people have told me about them, that they're super aggressive and that they'll chase you and all this kind of stuff. Now I have done some basic research where they'll do a mock charge against you. Basically they'll come at you and then stop. I've never had that happen before, but I guess that's possible. So far, I haven't found any documented case, or especially on video, where someone's actually been chased by one of these. And so, for the most part, I mean, they just want to be left alone. And so, if you do that and don't try to pick them up, certainly don't step on them, it's not likely you're going to get bit by one of these guys. Now, it's also possible to step on one of these underwater. I mean, I showed in the previous slide where they're very buoyant, but they can also go underwater and stay under there. They have a way of going underwater and staying down, and I don't know how long they can stay underwater, but there's been people that's been bit underwater by these. And so just know that if you're in freshwater lakes or streams, that it's possible you could get bit underwater by one of these guys. Okay, what we're looking at in this photograph is the timber rattler. And you won't find these too much around swampland, but it's possible they could get in there. They usually like to hang out in piney forest and sandy areas. So that's pretty much where you're going to find the timber rattler. They are venomous, but they're not as toxic as the Diamondback, which I'll show in the next slide. Okay, in this photograph we have the Eastern Diamondback, and that is the most lethal snake we have in Alabama, and also the most dangerous snake too. So what he will do for the most part is, like you see in this photograph, he'll bow up and get in the strike position. He may be rattling his rattler, and sometimes they'll actually bow up and start going backwards in this position while at the same time rattling, trying to get away from you. Even the Eastern Diamondback really don't want to bite you if you don't have to, but it certainly will if you try to aggravate this snake or try to kill it. And that's why a lot of people get bit just simply trying to kill these things, where if they'd have just left it alone, they could both go their own separate ways, and that'd have been the end of the day. So just watch out for these. They like to be in piney forest and sandy areas, and so they can even be out on the beach and even on islands out there offshore. I mean, they've been found on islands, 10, 12 miles from the beach. What we're looking at in this photograph is another picture of the Eastern Diamondback Rattler. You can see he's got kind of sort of the same mask that the water moccasin's got. It's got the classic diamond head. But this guy's really toxic. It's got a neurotoxic component to its venom, and that's what makes this snake so dangerous. And so if you get bit by one of these, probably the thing to do is to have someone, especially if they're with you, just immediately take you to the emergency room. And also, you don't have to kill this snake and bring it with you. That's been something that's been put out there for quite some years. They have a anti-venom that's pretty much covers all these different snakes. And not only that, it's possible you can get bit again trying to kill it, or your partner get bit trying to kill it just to bring it to the emergency room. It just isn't safe to do. So you don't have to do that. The most important thing is that you get to the emergency room as quick as you possibly can. And hopefully you are out there with somebody who can take you. It would be better really to have someone drive you to the emergency room, but if that's not possible, you need to call an ambulance and have them come out there and get you, because I don't know if I would attempt getting in my car and driving under the influence of one of these snake's toxins. That's just not safe to do that either. So be careful, when you're out there in the woods. Watch out, mainly just watch where you're stepping. None of these snakes really want to bite you. They really don't. They want to just go out and do their business and hunt and save that venom for their next meal. Of all the snakes out there, probably the one I fear the most is a Pygmy Rattlesnake. And the reason why I fear it so much is because it's so small and you can't hardly see it. I mean, they can really do a pretty good job in blending into their surroundings, and can coil up in an area about the size of a $50. You can see from looking at this photograph how well they blend in. I mean, they got pretty good camouflage. And a real short story about one of these, a friend of mine was actually hanging hurricane shutters for approaching storm, and he was scooting by his bushes. And that's another reason why you don't want to have a lot of thick vegetation growing up against the house. And while he was in the process of hanging his storm shutters, got bit on the elbow by a Pygmy rattlesnake. And so he had to go to the emergency room and get treatment for it. Now, one good thing about the Pygmy is they don't really have a whole lot of venom. So, they're just not as deadly as the Eastern Diamondback, but it's a very painful bite. And so you still want to go to the emergency room and get treatment from them. And one of the things, they don't really have a big button on the back of their tail. And so when they rattle, it kind of sounds like a bug or a big bee buzzing. So that's what you need to watch out for. If you hear that big buzzing sound, it's a possibility it could be a Pygmy Rattler. And they also hang out in beachy areas too. I mean, these have been found on Ono Island and down to Gulf. And so they like sandy areas and piney forest. Of all the snakes that are out there, the one that most people are bit by is the Copperhead, and that's what you're looking at in this photograph. And they are also masters of camouflage, and they depend on that camouflage to hide. So there's theory out there that the reason why they won't run off most of the time when you're walking up on them is because they're hoping that you don't see them and will walk past them. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't see them, and so they step on them and get bit. Now, one good thing about the copperhead is it's the least toxic of the venomous snakes that we have, but you do want to get treatment for it. I mean, there's been some people that's died as a result of copperhead bites, but there hadn't been that many that's died from them. I know this may be a little subjective, but it's actually kind of a pretty snake. The copperhead is. You can see that's got that copper tone. That's why it's called the copperhead. It's kind of sort of related to the water moccasin in some ways. Now, the water moccasin is definitely more venomous than the copperhead. But either way, if you get bit by either the copperhead or the water moccasin, you need to seek treatment at the nearest emergency room as fast as you possibly can. Now, another thing you need to watch out for as well, if you have bird feeders, these guys are kind of attracted to them, and it's not the bird feeder they care about, it's the birds coming to it. And that's the same with water moccasins and any other kind of snakes. So you got to watch out. I mean, your bird feeder could actually be attracting snakes too. I said in the other slide that the eastern diamondback was the most lethal snake that we have in Alabama. And that's mostly true because of its size and the amount of venom it can produce. And it does have a neurotoxic component to its venom. But really, the most venomous snake we have is the coral snake, and that's what you're looking at in this picture. There's actually a saying that goes, black and yellow kill a fellow. So that's what you want to look out for, is that black, and then it goes from black to yellow, black and yellow kill a fellow. But these are really docile snakes, and you hardly ever see them. I mean, it's actually pretty rare to find one of them in general. And so pretty much the only way to really get bit by the coral snake is by picking it up. I mean, that's pretty much what you have to do to get bit by a coral snake. You actually have to pick the thing up and handle it to get bit. And I don't think most people would do that. So, this is one snake you really don't want to kill. If you really just don't want to kill the coral snake, they're kind of rare and they're a pretty snake, and they're not going to bite you unless you pick it up. So just leave these guys alone. Now, there was a case last year where a person got bit by a coral snake. I never did find out what the end result of that was. But what happened was he picked it up and thought it was a king snake, which you're looking at here. This is called a scarlet king snake, and it does resemble the coral snake. And so this is what he thought he was picking up. And of course, when he did, the snake bit him, and he didn't even really realize that he was in bad trouble because he thought he was being bit by a king snake. The one thing about the coral snake is it doesn't have really fangs. It has more like a row of teeth. They kind of have to sort of gnaw into you, but it's got the same venom that the cobra has. It's strictly a neurotoxic venom. It's very powerful and potent. And so, basically that's his fault. He should have never picked it up, should have left it alone, and he would have never wound up in the hospital. Who knows, he may have died. I've just never followed up on it. But that's the reason why some people do get bit by coral snakes, is you got these people who are herpers, I guess they call them, and they go out looking for snakes, and they think they know what they're doing. And of course, they don't, and get bit and wind up in serious trouble. What you're looking at in this left photograph is a set of snake tongs, and this is what I use to capture snakes and relocate them to safer areas. And this right picture is a plastic owl. These things are relatively cheap, and they're pretty effective as far as keeping snakes off your property. Like I said in some of my previous slides, that many people get bit by snakes from trying to kill them. Well, here's a story of a guy that was in a hunting club with me. There was a large diamondback rattlesnake at the edge of his fence, and he took a flathead shovel, cut its head off, and he went to scoop up the head. And what happened was the head rolled down the handle and it bit him on the hand. And he was in the hospital for over a month, and it nearly killed him. He was in intensive care for a couple of weeks. So there you go. I mean, even a severed head from one of these things can be deadly. And that's why a lot of people get bit by snakes they think are dead. They can be cut in half and still bite you. So don't ever touch them, even if you think they're dead. Even if you know they're dead, don't touch them. They're just very dangerous animals. And so I hate to tell that kind of gruesome story, but I'm kind of sort of telling you this to save your life maybe, because I'd hate for you to go out with the flathead shovel and cut one in half and get bit by it. So that's the reason why I figured I'd end it with this slide right here. Thanks for taking the time to watch this presentation. And also please subscribe to Southern Home Talk. We're committed to the issues that affect us in the Deep South. And also check out the many other videos we have listed on our YouTube channel. Hopefully this has been somewhat informative to you, and I hope that you'll take more time than what was put in this presentation to do your own digging. Try to figure out what all the other non-poisonous snakes are and what they look like, so you won't accidentally kill one of them. They are beneficial, they're good for our environment, and so we do have a vast array of different non-toxic snakes that like to hang around our houses. And like I say, most of them are not poisonous. So take the time to find out what they are. Take care.